You eat like you're angry at the food.
She didn't know that the quiet Korean man who sat next to her in a danfo bus in Lagos was one of the most dangerous men in Seoul. She just thought he was terrible at eating suya. She was wrong about one of those things. Welcome to Love, Lies and Fate, your home for Afro-Korean stories that will make you laugh, cry, and forget you were supposed to be asleep 2 hours ago. If you are new here, hello. You picked the right day to find this channel, and if you have been here, you already know what we do. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this story is the one people are going to be talking about, and you do not want to be the last one at the table. Now, let's get into it. The day Adaeze landed in Incheon Airport with 2 oversized suitcases, a carry-on shaped like a watermelon, and absolutely no plan, she had exactly 3 things going for her. 1, she spoke 0 Korean. 2, her boyfriend's family didn't know she existed. And 3, she had just legally become their son's wife in a Lagos courthouse 6 days ago. Welcome to Korea, baby. Let's go back. Because this story doesn't start in an airport. It starts in a traffic jam on 3rd Mainland Bridge on a Tuesday afternoon so hot that the air itself looked tired. Adaeze was sitting in the back of a yellow danfo bus, fanning herself with a receipt from Mr. Biggs, wondering why she had chosen to wear her good wig today of all days, when the bus stopped suddenly and a man fell through the door. Not metaphorically. Literally fell. Through the door. Into the bus. Onto the floor. He was tall. He was wearing a white shirt that was now definitely not white. He had cheekbones that should have been illegal under Nigerian law. And he looked up at her from the floor of a danfo bus in Lagos traffic and said, in the most serious voice she had ever heard, "Is this the bus to Victoria Island?" Adaeze stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then she said, "Brother, you just fell into the bus. We haven't even moved yet, and your shirt is finished." The whole bus laughed. He didn't. He just looked at her like she was the most interesting problem he had encountered in years, stood up, dusted himself off with the quiet dignity of a man who refused to be embarrassed, and sat down in the empty seat next to her. His name was Jae-won. Kim Jae-won. He was in Lagos for a business acquisition that had gone sideways in ways he was not prepared to discuss with anyone, least of all a woman in a yellow bus who was now eating chin-chin out of a small nylon's bag and offering him some with the energy of someone who had known him for years. He said no to the chin-chin. She shrugged and said, "Your loss." He looked out the window. She looked at her phone. They sat in traffic for 45 minutes. By minute 12, he had accepted the chin-chin. By minute 27, he had told her more about himself than he had told anyone in 3 years. By minute 45, when the bus finally lurched forward and they arrived at different stops, he had her number, she had his, and neither of them said it, but something had already started. He texted her that night. Just 3 words. The chin-chin helped. She sent back a laughing emoji and a photo of a new bag she had just opened. He replied with the most stiff and formal, "That looks delicious," she had ever received in her life, and she laughed until her stomach hurt, because it was the cutest thing she had ever seen and she wasn't about to tell him that. He was in Lagos for 2 more weeks. She didn't plan to see him again. Life had other opinions. She ran into him at a fabric market on Thursday. He was standing completely still in the middle of organized chaos, holding his phone like a map, looking exactly like what he was. A very handsome man who was very, very lost. She walked past him, then she stopped, turned around, walked back, and said, "Are you seriously just standing there?" He looked at her like she was a gift he hadn't ordered but couldn't return. "I'm trying to locate a supplier." In Balogan Market. Yes. By standing still. I was formulating a strategy. She laughed. "Jae-won, this market has eaten stronger people than you. Come." She grabbed his wrist without thinking and pulled him through the crowd, and he followed without hesitation, which surprised both of them. She found his supplier in 12 minutes. He had been walking in circles for 40. He thanked her with the kind of sincerity that landed in your chest. She waved it off. He insisted on buying her suya. She accepted immediately because she had standards, but she also had sense. They sat on plastic chairs outside the market and ate suya off newspaper, and he kept picking the pepper out of his, and she kept adding more to hers, and he watched her eat with the focused attention of someone studying a phenomenon, and she caught him looking and said, "What?" He said, "You eat like you're angry at the food." She pointed her stick at him. "That is called passion. You wouldn't understand. You eat like you're apologizing to the suya." He looked at his stick, looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. A real one, not the polite corporate version. A real smile, slow and a little crooked, and it was so unexpected that Adaeze had to look away, because her chest did something stupid, and she was not about to give Lagos Suya the credit for that. The 2 weeks passed like something someone had put on fast forward. They met 4 more times, always accidentally, which both of them knew was a lie by the 3rd time. He came to her street and sat in his car until she texted him, and she texted him first, which she told her best friend Chrism was completely normal and she would not be discussing it further. They talked about everything. His work, which he described in vague and fluid terms that she didn't press on, because she was raised to know when not to ask questions. Her textile business, which he asked about with such genuine interest that she showed him her sketchbooks, which she had never shown anyone. Her dreams, his silences. The way he listened, like you were the only sound in a very loud world. On his last night in Lagos, they sat on the roof of a restaurant in Lekki, and he looked at the city like he was memorizing it, and she knew he was leaving in the morning, and something in her wanted to say, "Don't go," which was ridiculous because she had known this man for 2 weeks, and she was Adaeze Okonkwo from Enugu, and she did not beg anyone for anything. So instead she said, "You know you have to come back. You still owe me a proper introduction to Korean food." That one suya exchange was not enough. He turned and looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come to Seoul." She blinked. "What?" "Come to Seoul. I'll show you everything." Jae-won. "I mean it. We've known each other for 2 weeks. 12 days. That's shorter than 2 weeks. Come anyway." She looked at him. He looked at her. The city hummed below them, loud and golden, and Lagos never asked anyone's permission for anything. And maybe that's why she said yes. Just like that. Yes. Like it was simple. Like it wasn't the most reckless thing she had done since she cut her own hair at 14. She did not go immediately. She was not a woman who abandoned her life for a man, and she had bolts of Ankara that needed to go to 3 separate clients, and Chisholm needed her for a business meeting that week. But 3 months later, on a cold December morning when business was slow and her heart was loud, she booked a flight to Seoul. She told Chisholm. Chisholm screamed. She told her mother she was going for a business sourcing trip. Her mother said, "Which business?" She said, "Textiles." Her mother said, "Bring me back something warm." Adaeze said, "Yes, Ma." And that was that. What she did not do, what she absolutely, completely did not do, was tell Jae-won she was coming. She was going to. She picked up her phone 5 times to call him. But there was something about the way he talked about his family, something careful and coded, like he was editing himself in real time, and every time she pressed dial, she thought about that edited version of him, and something made her stop. She told herself she was being spontaneous. Chisholm told her she was being a whole situation. Adaeze told Chisholm to mind her business. Chisholm said, "This is your funeral, Ada." Adaeze said, "You're so dramatic." And she boarded the plane. Now, back to the airport, Incheon Airport. December, cold in ways Lagos had never prepared her for. She walked out of customs in her best coat, cream-colored, belted, ankle length, absolutely correct. with her watermelon carry-on rolling behind her and her 2 oversized suitcases because she had not packed for 2 weeks. She had packed for possibilities, and she stood in the arrivals hall and looked around at the sea of Korean faces and signs and a coffee shop called Angel in Us and thought, I am in Seoul. I am actually in Seoul, and nobody knows I'm here. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her ears. She checked into a small guest house in Mapo-gu that she had booked online, a clean little room with heated floors that made her gasp out loud the first time she stood on them in her socks. Because whoever invented on-floor heating was a genius, and she was going to find out their name and thank them personally. She sat on the bed. She looked at her phone. She looked at Jae-won's contact. She typed, "Hey." She deleted it. She typed, "Guess where I am." She deleted that too. She typed, "So funny story." She threw her phone on the bed, got up, looked out the window at a Seoul evening that was all lit up signs and cold air and street food steam and thought, okay, I'm here. What is the plan? She didn't have one. That was the plan. She went out for food because she was Adaeze and she handled stress by eating, and she found a pojang matcha, a little street tent, near her guest house run by a tiny elderly woman who took one look at her and started speaking rapid Korean and gesturing at various pots with an authority that suggested Adaeze should simply sit down and accept whatever was about to happen to her. So she sat. The woman brought her tteokbokki. Adaeze took one bite and her eyes watered immediately, not from sadness but from the righteous, beautiful, burning truth of that red sauce. And she looked at the old woman and said, "Uni, this is correct." And the old woman didn't understand the words but understood the face and nodded once like, "I know." She ate the whole thing. She ordered more. She felt better. She was ready. The next morning she called Jae-won. He picked up on the second ring because he always picked up on the second ring, never the first. She had noticed this. Like he was giving himself one ring to compose himself, and she had decided that was one of the most quietly tender things about him. "Ada," he said, and just her name in his voice, just that, was enough to remind her why she had gotten on a plane. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice very casual. "So, question, are you in Seoul right now?" Brief pause. "Yes." Cool, me too." Complete silence. "What?" "I'm in Seoul. I got in yesterday. I'm in Mapo-gu. The floors are heated. I'm obsessed." "You're—" He stopped. Started again. "Ada, you're in Seoul." "I just said that." "You didn't tell me you were coming." It was a surprise. "For who?" "For you." "I don't—" Another pause, and she could hear him breathing, recalibrating, doing that thing he did where he processed information the way other people processed grief, slowly, thoroughly, and privately. Then he said, "Where exactly are you?" She told him. He arrived in 22 minutes. She was sitting on the front step of the guest house in her coat when his car pulled up, a sleek black thing that suited him completely, and he got out and stood there looking at her like she was something he had been told was impossible and was now being asked to accept as real. She stood up and smiled. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and he didn't say anything. He just held her face in both his hands and looked at her like she was the most infuriating and wonderful thing that had happened to him in years. And she said, "Jae-won, you're going to freeze my face." And he kissed her. Right there, on the pavement, in front of her guest house, in the Mapo-gu cold. A slow, quiet, devastating kiss that said things neither of them had said out loud yet. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, and he said very quietly, "Ginger, you actually came." She said, "I told you I would." "You said maybe." Maybe meant yes. He laughed then, a real one, that same slow, crooked smile, and he said, "You're the most unpredictable person I've ever met." And she said, "I know. Lucky you." He took her to breakfast, a proper one, at a restaurant near Gyeongbokgung. where he ordered for both of them with the ease of a man completely at home, and she watched him across the table and thought about how different he looked here. In Lagos, he had been slightly out of place, slightly exposed, interesting in the way a sharp thing is interesting when you find it somewhere unexpected. Here he was sharp in a different way. Composed. Fluent in himself. She filed that away. They spent 3 days like that. He showed her the city the way a person who loves something shows you what they love. Slowly, with attention, pointing out the things tourists don't find, and the food that doesn't appear in guidebooks. She tried every snack he put in front of her. He watched her reactions the way people watch their favorite scene in a movie. She tried fish-shaped bread filled with red bean paste and announced it was the greatest thing she had eaten since her mother's ofe onugbu, which was very high praise, and she was not giving it lightly. He bought her 3 more. She was already planning her imports business around this fish bread. On the 3rd evening, they were walking along the Han River, the kind of walk that happens slowly because neither person wants it to end. And he was quiet in a way that had a shape to it, a weight, and she finally stopped walking and turned to him and said, "Talk to me." He looked at the river for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I need to tell you." She waited. "My family." She waited more. "They don't know about you." She had suspected something like this, but hearing it said plainly still landed a little hard. "Okay," she said carefully. "Why?" He was quiet again. "My family is traditional. My mother especially. She has ideas about who I should be with, who I should marry." He paused. "She has been trying to arrange a marriage for me for 2 years. Jae-won. I've been refusing. Okay, but Ada." He turned to look at her directly, and his eyes were very serious and very clear. "I refused because of you. Even before you came here. Even when I didn't know if you would come. I refused because I already knew." The Han River kept moving. The city lights kept reflecting. Adaeze's heart did something complicated. And she said, "You already knew what?" He said very simply, "That you were it for me." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Kim Jae-won." "Yes, that was the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "Good. Don't let it go to your head." "It won't. I'm serious." He kissed her again, slower this time. The city did not stop. The river did not care. But for a moment, standing on the bank of the Han River with a man who had fallen through the door of a danfo bus and somehow fallen into her life, Adaeze Okonkwo felt exactly like the main character of the story she had always wanted to live. Then he pulled back and said, "I want you to meet my family." And just like that, the warmth evaporated. She blinked. "Come again." "My family. I want them to meet you." "The family that doesn't know I exist?" "Yes." "The mother who has been arranging your marriage for 2 years?" "Yes." "Jae-won. I have just learned how to say kamsahamnida without sounding like I'm having a medical emergency. I'm not ready to meet Korean parents." He almost smiled. "You'll be fine." "I will absolutely not be fine. I don't know the rules. In Nigeria, when you meet someone's parents, you bring a massive bag of provisions and maybe some malt drinks and your Sunday best. What do I bring to Korean parents? What is the Korean version of malt drinks? You don't need to bring anything. I am bringing something. I am Igbo Jae-won. We don't arrive at people's houses empty-handed. That is not how we were raised." He said, "My mother will respect the gesture." "Will she respect me?" He was quiet, honestly quiet, not reassuring quiet, not dismissing her concern quiet, but genuinely considering it quiet, which she appreciated even as it scared her. Then he said, "She will learn to." That is not a yes. It is a beginning. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "When?" He said, "Sunday." It was Friday. She called Chisholm that night in a full panic. "Chisholm. Ada. He wants me to meet the family." Complete silence from Lagos. Then, I told you, funeral. Chisholm, please, this is not the time for jokes. This is Sunday. How did you know? Because it's always Sunday, Ada. Korean parents, Sunday. It's giving family lunch drama. It's giving kimchi and confrontation. Are you going to survive? I don't know. What do you have to wear? I packed well. That's not what I asked. What do you have to wear to meet a traditional Korean mother who has been arranging her son's marriage for 2 years? Adaeze looked at her suitcases. She had packed an absolutely stunning purple Ankara set. She had packed 2 jumpsuits. She had packed her going-out dress. What she had not packed was something that said respectable future daughter-in-law to someone who was not expecting a daughter-in-law at all, let alone this one. I need to go shopping, she said. She went shopping on Saturday with Jae-won, who was a terrible shopping companion because he kept agreeing with everything she picked up, which was useless, and she finally turned to him and said, I need you to actually have opinions. This is your mother. What does she like? He thought about it. She wears a lot of grey. That tells me nothing about what she'll respect on me. She values, he thought carefully, neatness, restraint. She's not a flashy person. Adaeze looked at the ankara set in her hands. Put it back. Restraint, she muttered. I packed 0 restraint. They found something eventually. A deep navy midi dress, structured, simple, elegant, the kind of dress that said, I know who I am, without announcing it. She found small gold earrings that were tasteful by her standards, which Jae-won said were beautiful, which Chisholm confirmed via video call was the right call. She bought a nice set of fruit and traditional Korean sweets from a department store because she was bringing something to this woman's house, if it was the last thing she did. And Jae-won watched her deliberate over the gift packaging for 15 minutes with the quiet affection of a man who had accepted that some things just had to be allowed to happen. Saturday night, she couldn't sleep. She lay on the heated floor. She had abandoned the bed by now. The floor was simply superior. And stared at the ceiling and had a very real conversation with herself. She was Adaeze Okonkwo. She had built a textile business from scratch. She had negotiated fabric prices in 3 languages with suppliers who did not want to give her good deals and had won every time. She had survived Lagos traffic, her auntie Ngozi's commentary at every family function, and a danfo bus ride that produced a Korean husband. She could survive Sunday lunch. She almost believed herself. Jae-won picked her up at 11. He looked at her and his whole face did something soft, and he said, You look beautiful. She said, I know. Is it too much? He said, It is perfect. She said, You have to say that. He said, I don't have to say anything. She decided to believe him. The drive to his family's house was 40 minutes. He drove and she sat beside him, and the silence was the kind that has texture. She watched Seoul pass outside the window, the wide streets and the mountains visible between the buildings and the way everything was organized in a way that Lagos laughed at, and she thought, This country is going to be complicated for me to love, and I'm going to love it anyway. She said, Tell me about them. All of them. Right now. I need information. He said, My mother, Kim Soon-hee. She is 63. She ran the family company's administrative side for 20 years before she retired. She's very sharp. She doesn't miss things. She will notice everything about you in the first 10 seconds. Great, wonderful. Continue. My father, Kim Sung-jin. He is quieter than my mother. He likes golf. He will probably not say much. Don't take it personally. Okay. My grandmother. She's 79. She is... He paused. She will be the most comfortable one in the room. Why? She doesn't care about rules as much as she used to. Is that it? Just the 3 of them? He paused. She caught it. Jae-won. My sister is also there. How old? 20. What is she like? Another pause. Kim Jae-won. She's very enthusiastic. he said carefully. About what? Currently? Everything Black American. She's been learning about it on the internet. Adaeze turned her head very slowly toward him. Define learning. He kept his eyes on the road. She watches a lot of videos. About what kinds of things? Hair, mostly. She's very interested in natural hair. Adaeze looked at her hair. Her beautiful, carefully twisted out natural hair that she had spent 45 minutes on this morning and which was currently sitting on her head in a full, gorgeous cloud of coils. Your sister is going to try to touch my hair, she said. He said nothing. Jae-won. I told her not to. You told her not to. Several times. Starting when? This morning. Adaeze pressed her lips together. Okay, she said. Okay, we're going to be fine. They turned into a residential area that got quieter and leafier as they drove. Houses set back from the road with neat gardens. The kind of neighborhood that held its own dignity without having to announce it. He stopped in front of a house that was beautiful in a spare, deliberate way, all clean lines and stone and a garden that was perfectly maintained even in December. She took a breath. He came around and opened her door and held out his hand, and she took it, and they walked up to the front door together, and she thought about every drama she had ever watched where the foreign girlfriend meets the Korean family and it goes terribly. And she thought, I'm not in a drama. And then the door opened. Kim Soon-hee was a small woman with a posture that made her seem 10 centimeters taller than she was. She had short hair, precisely cut, and she was wearing gray. Jae-won had been entirely correct about the gray. And she looked at her son, and then she looked at Adaeze, and her face did something that was not quite any recognizable expression, but contained all of them at once. There was about half a second of pure, stunned silence, the kind that had a sound, and then she said something to Jae-won in Korean, very quickly, that Adaeze did not understand, but the tone of which she understood perfectly. Jae-won answered calmly. She said something else, sharper. He answered again. Adaeze stood there, holding her department store gift bag, and smiled the specific smile of a woman who was going to hold it together if it killed her. Then the grandmother appeared. Adaeze had been told 79. What she was not told was that 79 in this woman's case looked like a force of nature wearing a hanbok. Small, bright-eyed, with the energy of someone who had decided decades ago that life was for the interested, and she was very, very interested. She came to the door, looked at Adaeze, and then her face broke into the biggest smile Adaeze had seen since she'd arrived in Korea, and she reached out both hands and took Adaeze's free hand and said something warm and rapid, and Jae-won translated, slightly flustered, She says you are the most beautiful woman to come to this house since her daughter-in-law. Adaeze said, Please tell her she is the most stylish woman I've seen in Seoul. Jae-won translated. The grandmother laughed delightedly, said something else, squeezed her hand, and basically pulled her into the house. The mother watched all of this with an expression Adaeze couldn't read yet, but was filing away. The father was in the living room with a newspaper. He looked up, looked at Adaeze, looked at Jae-won, looked at Adaeze again. He said something to Jae-won that seemed to be a question. Jae-won answered. The father considered this for a moment, then he nodded at Adaeze, with the measured respect of someone acknowledging that something was real, regardless of whether it had been expected. She bowed the way Jae-won had taught her. He looked surprised, and then pleased. Then, from somewhere in the house came the sound of fast footsteps, and then a young woman appeared in the doorway who could only have been Jae-won's sister because she had his cheekbones and his exact particular way of looking at something like it was the most interesting thing currently happening. Except that where Jae-won expressed this quietly, his sister expressed it at volume. She was 20 years old, and she was wearing an oversized hoodie and looking at Adaeze with the wide, overwhelmed eyes of someone who had just met a celebrity they thought was fictional. Ione, she breathed. Adaeze blinked. She looked at Jae-won. he said quietly. She's calling you older sister. Adaeze felt something warm open in her chest. She looked back at the sister. Hi, the sister said. Your hair. Very quietly, like a prayer. Jae-won said, Ji-yeon, we talked about this. Ji-yeon was not listening to Jae-won. Ji-yeon was looking at Adaeze's hair the way Adaeze had looked at the heated floor on her first night, with reverence, with longing, with a very specific kind of need. Adaeze said, You like it? Ji-yeon said, I have watched 47 videos about natural hair. Adaeze said, 47? Ji-yeon said, I have been practicing the techniques. Adaeze said, On what? Ji-yeon said, My doll. There was a beat of silence. Then Adaeze laughed, a real full laugh that filled the room and bounced off the stone and went everywhere, and Ji-yeon looked briefly mortified, and then started laughing too. And the grandmother, not knowing what was funny but deeply delighted that things were funny, also laughed, and the father lowered his newspaper slightly, and even Jae-won had to look at the wall for a moment. The only person not laughing was Kim Soon-hee, who was standing very still and watching Adaeze the way you watch something you haven't decided about yet. Lunch was served. The table was full. Jeon and galbijim and japchae, and 3 kinds of kimchi, and a soup that Adaeze didn't recognize but smelled like warmth made liquid. She said sincerely, looking at the spread, Ginger, did you cook all of this? She looked at Jae-won to translate. He looked faintly pained, which she knew meant she had accidentally used one of the 3 Korean words she knew and used it correctly, which surprised him. The grandmother said something. Jae-won translated, She says she woke up at 6 to make the galbijim. Adaeze put her hand over her heart and looked at the grandmother and said, Thank you, kamsahamnida. The grandmother beamed. Jae-won looked at her. She shrugged. She had done some studying. The mother had made the japchae. Adaeze ate it and said, very honestly, because she was many things, but dishonest was not one of them, This is one of the best things I've ever eaten. She meant it, Jae-won translated. The mother's expression shifted by about 4%, which Adaeze caught because she was watching closely and because 4% from Kim Soon-hee felt like a standing ovation. The father asked, through Jae-won, what she did. She told him about the textiles. He asked specific questions about supply chains, about her market, about distribution, and she answered all of them directly and in detail because she knew her business the way she knew her own name. She watched him listen and recalibrate. He asked one more question, and Jae-won translated. He wants to know if you supply to Korean markets. Not yet, she said. But I've been looking at the Dongdaemun market. The Korean fabric design aesthetic and West African textile patterns have crossover potential that nobody is exploiting properly. Jae-won translated. The father was quiet for a moment. Then he said something. He says that's a good observation. Adaeze did not let herself react on the outside. On the inside, she was doing her full victory dance, the one she reserved for closing big deals and the day she found parking on Lagos Island on a Friday. Ji-yeon talked for most of the meal. She asked Adaeze questions with zero filter. What products did she use in her hair? Was it heavy? Did it hurt to comb? How long had it been since she had a relaxer? Had she ever wanted to cut it all off? What was her wash-day routine? And Adaeze answered every single one patiently, because Ji-yeon was asking with such genuine, hungry curiosity, the kind that wanted to understand, not the kind that wanted to other. She asked Ji-yeon about her own hair, and Ji-yeon pulled at her very straight, very well-conditioned hair and said, Mine is boring. And Adaeze said, Nothing is boring. It's about what you do with it. And Ji-yeon looked at her like she had said something profound. The grandmother, who had been listening with apparent contentment, leaned over and said something to Jae-won. He listened. Something in his face shifted. She said something else. He said something back, quieter. She persisted. Then she said something and patted Adaeze's hand and looked at Jae-won with expectation. Adaeze watched him absorb whatever had just been said. Then she said, "What did she say?" He was quiet for a second. Then, "She said she's glad I finally brought someone home." Pause. "She said she can tell you're the kind of woman who knows her own value." Another pause. "And she asked when the wedding is." The table went quiet. Even Ji-yeon stopped talking. The father had gone carefully still, and Kim Soon-hee, who had been managing herself with remarkable composure through this entire meal, finally looked at her son with an expression that contained multitudes. Adaeze looked at Jae-won. He looked at her. The moment stretched. Then he said very clearly to the table, in Korean, and Adaeze caught her name in the sentence, and the way his voice was when he said it, and then Jae-won translated for her alone, quietly. "I told them she already said yes." The room processed this. Ji-yeon made a noise that was somewhere between a scream and a squeak and clapped both hands over her mouth. The father set down his chopsticks very deliberately. The grandmother looked triumphant in the way of someone whose horse just won a race she predicted years ago. And Kim Soon-hee sat very still for a long, long moment. Then she said something, just to Adaeze. Directly, no translation from Jae-won. Just to her. Adaeze looked at Jae-won. He was already listening. His face was careful, but his eyes were doing something. She waited. He said, "She says, you have a strong face." She says, "She doesn't know what kind of woman you are yet, but she says that a woman who travels across the world with no plan and sits at a stranger's table and eats the food and asks no easy questions is either very brave or very foolish." He paused. "She says she hopes it is the former." Adaeze held Kim Soon-hee's gaze. She thought about the danfo bus, about Third Mainland Bridge, about 45 minutes in traffic and Chin-Chin and a man who got back up off the floor and sat next to her and changed everything. About a flight she booked alone in a guest house with heated floors and a gift bag from a department store and 47 hair videos and a grandmother who woke up at 6 in the morning to make galbijim for someone she hadn't known was coming. She said, "Tell her, I know what kind of woman I am, and I know what kind of man her son is, and I'm not going anywhere." Jae-won translated. Kim Soon-hee listened. She looked at Adaeze for a long moment. Then she looked at her son. Then she said one word. Jae-won exhaled slowly. Adaeze said, "What did she say?" He said, "She said, good." Ji-yeon burst into actual tears. The father picked his chopsticks back up. The grandmother reached over and loaded more galbi onto Adaeze's plate with the authority of a woman who had made her decision. Adaeze picked up her chopsticks, which she had been using correctly this whole time. "Thank you very much." She had also watched videos. And she ate. And across the table, Jae-won caught her eye. And the look he gave her was the kind that said 1,000 things in a language that needed no translation. After lunch, when the father had gone back to his newspaper and the grandmother was napping and Ji-yeon had dragged Adaeze to her room to show her what she described as her natural hair research board, which was genuinely one of the most thorough pinboards Adaeze had ever seen. This girl had done her due diligence. Kim Soon-hee found Jae-won alone in the kitchen. She spoke to him for a long time. He listened. He answered. She spoke again. He answered again, and this time his voice had something in it she hadn't heard in a long time. Something settled. When she finally left the kitchen, she paused in the doorway. She looked back at her son. She said one more thing, quietly. Then she was gone. Adaeze came back downstairs 40 minutes later, slightly dazed, holding a handwritten list of all the products Ji-yeon was now ordering based on their conversation, and she found Jae-won standing in the kitchen with his hands in his pockets looking out the window. She came and stood beside him. "What did your mother say to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "She said she can't control what I choose. She said she only wanted me to be sure." He paused. "She said if I was sure, then she would learn." Adaeze let that sit. And what did you say? I said I was sure. And then what did she say? He turned from the window and looked at her. She said, "She makes good John. Invite her back next week." Adaeze's mouth fell open, then she closed it, then she covered her face with both hands and laughed into her palms. Kim Soon-hee, she gave me a review. She gave you a review. She judged my lunch performance and I passed. You passed. Jae-won, this is the best day of my life. Better than the suya. Don't push it, he smiled. That real one. The slow, crooked one she had first seen on a plastic chair outside Balogun Market. The one that had undone her then and undid her now, and she thought, yes. This is it. This man and his sharp face and his terrible dancing. She had discovered the dancing, it was a whole separate issue. And his grandmother who woke up at 6 and his sister who had a research board and his mother who said learn instead of leave. And these streets and these heated floors and this city that was slowly becoming hers too. She said, "Mianhe, by the way." He raised an eyebrow. For what? For not telling you I was coming. He looked at her for a moment. Are you actually sorry? She thought about it honestly. No, he laughed. The full one. The rare one. Neither am I, he said. He held out his hand. She took it. Outside, Seoul was going blue with evening, the mountains watching from a distance, the city exhaling and settling into itself the way cities do when the day shifts to night and everything gets a little softer. They stood together in his mother's kitchen, and it was just the beginning. And the beginning was enough. But here's the thing. Here's the thing they didn't know yet. The thing sitting quietly on the other side of all this warmth. The thing that hadn't announced itself yet. There was a reason Jae-won had described his work in vague and fluid terms. There was a reason he had people who answered phone calls before the second ring while he always waited for it. There was a reason that 3 of the men at the company dinner she had seen in photos online had eyes that watched rooms the way soldiers watch terrain. There was a reason Kim Soon-hee had looked at her son on Sunday and said, "Be sure," in the tone of a woman who knew exactly what she was asking him to be sure about. And there was a reason that 2 days after Sunday lunch, on a Tuesday morning when Adaeze was sitting in the heated guest house eating fish bread and video-calling Chisholm to tell her everything, a black car she had never seen before pulled up outside, and a man she had never seen before got out and looked at the building with a very specific kind of attention and looked up at her window. Chisholm on the video call said, "Ada, what's happening?" Adaeze said slowly, "I don't know yet." But she had a feeling she was about to find out. She came to Seoul for love. She found a family she never planned for, and somewhere between a danfo bus and a Sunday lunch table, something shifted that cannot be undone. But there is a car parked outside, and a man looking up at her window, and a version of Kim Jae-won that Adaeze has not met yet. Episode 2 is coming to Love, Lies and Fate, Afro-Korean Stories. Subscribe. Stay close. And ask yourself, how well do you ever really know someone? We will see you next time.